Hello and welcome to this new video. And today we're going to talk about Icebox. Um, Basically, what this video is just going to be is me talking about what I think of the map, or not really what I think of the map, because I think you can quite clearly see in the title that I don't really enjoy how Icebox is played, and I think it's just in general a map that's really difficult to play well, and that's not inherently a bad thing. I just think it's a uncomfortable map to play and just has inherent problems where there are certain parts of the map that just gets unused and certain parts of the maps that are just not even playable at all. Like you can't play there as one of the sides. It's just that inherently one-sided that it's practically impossible to do anything. Um, but yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. I'm gonna start off by just kind of going through a bit how I think the map is currently being played and what my problems are with that inherent type like play and why I think that that's very limited to me personally. And then I'm gonna go through the changes I've made and my thought process. Um and also I'm gonna kind of go through the map's identity because I feel like the map's identity still needs to try to stay the same. Although I think the map's identity is a bit flawed, I do think you can make it work with some changes. So let's actually start there with what I think Icebox map identity was supposed to be from the beginning, and that is elevation. I think this is probably the only map in the entire game where you see basically everywhere on the map you're trying to build off some sort of elevation. Like there's elevation literally everywhere. It's a very complex map compared to the rest, and therefore it's also a very like it has a lot of different um, elevations. Like it's very complex compared to a lot of the other maps because of just the sort of different heights you can play on and all of this. That's sort of what I believe is the identity of the map, is just trying to have many different sort of angle heights to play off of, which I inherently don't think is a bad map identity. I do think the problem that we have with Icebox currently though is that the current identity kind of is a bit of a mixed combination between angle density and um and different like elevations that just doesn't really work. Currently, it feels like you've kind of have a combination of a insanely high angle density combined with the fact that there's just a lot like it's a bit of like angle density on top of elevation, which just means that it's really uncomfortable to do anything. Like if you're gonna play from here, for example, you need to clear up top here, here, down here. And a lot of the times you're just going into inherent like angles where they can be both where they can have three different heights, three different angles on three different heights that are forced to swing into all three no matter what. And I just think that that's just bad map design. And that's kind of where I want to fix it, especially A. I think in general why it's bad is just kind of you can't have a map where you're basically forced to take a site, you're basically forced to use utility to even be able to remotely securely take the site. Yes, of course, utility is always going to make it easier and all this and all that. But if you're in the end round and you know that somebody could be sitting here, 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 like there could literally be a four stack holding you here, and they're all going to be on different angles, it's just impossible to clear that. Like there's no way you can clear that. And sure, there's can be crossfires and things like that, but when there can but there is like a point where it becomes too much. And I think that's sort of the line that I feel like Icebox not has like went past. And I feel like there's not a lot of maps in Valorant that does that, and that's kind of where my problem lies with Icebox. So let's just go through each site and what makes me feel like that's a problem on each site. We already talked a bit about A, but I want to go a bit more in depth. As I do feel like this part of A is somewhat decent. I do think I like this sort of unique way to play it where it's kind of open and closed. Like there's quite a lot of things happening here. I do like it. I do think this is probably the good part of it. At the same time, the reason it's good is because it's the only playable area, as we're going to come to. Basically, how you play on A as a defender is either you play for retake and just for stall to get a kill, or you play pushed up in positions like this. The problem with that is that the pushed up positions, first off, are extremely easy to clear. Like you just throw a Silver Recon here or a KO knife and then flash over, and they're literally done. You can't do anything about it. And it's so ridiculous that a lot of the time people just end up playing retake A and playing heavy mid to B, which just is not a very fun map to play, right? And that's also why oftentimes we see players and teams just go into A hits. Like there was a bunch of videos I saw made like a little while ago where there was team, and I watched that game as well, where they just blasted A 12 rounds in a row, won every single round. Because you need like it's so incredibly difficult to hold A that it's just unfair. Like the attacker sidedness of this site, like retaking is bad. Like the thing is with this site, right? Already as is, retaking on this site is difficult because the smallness of this choke, and then as I talked about before, the angle density going through this choke. Meaning basically what just ends up happening is that either you play retake and lose, you push up and lose, you play site and lose. And it just becomes this sort of thing where on A, you basically either need a miracle or the opponent needs to play bad in some way. And sure, there are solutions to this, but they are very, very limited, which just makes for a sort of boring map style and a boring way to play the map. And when it comes to B, there's some different change. There's some different issues I have. I like this. Here we see more of that sort of um, uh, still the sort of thing we were talking about on A, where they have, or not the bad thing we were talking about on A, but we still see the elevation, right? We have this box here that you can go up on. You have this, we have this, and like the heaven here. Like there's still quite a lot of elevation, but I actually like this site a lot more. The one inherent problem I have with it though is that a lot of times teams are not forced to take anything, um, which basically just results in a lot of the time people just end up blasting site hits. Because as we're going to talk about the issues with mid, just makes it just the issues that we have with mid currently just makes it that it's not worth going mid because of how attacker side of the sites are. Because currently, basically, what you can just do is what people usually do on this map. If you didn't know already, people just put this Viper wall up and plant here. And what does this do? It creates the dilemma where you basically give the defenders all of sight and then you just play post. You just plant spike on this little area of sight, give them the rest of it, and then just play post plant. And I just inherently think that that's a bad way to play the game. And in general, I do feel like you gotta punish teams. You gotta like it gotta be something that you can punish. Like I can understand that you don't always need to take all of sight, but if you do that, there should be a. If you don't, there should still always be a counter that you could like there should always be something negative about not taking all of sight, and then taking all of sight should also punish you in a bit, in a way as well. Like there should be punishes for taking all of sight and for not taking all of sight. So you have this sort of fluidity in the game where you have multiple options that all stack up somewhat similarly, or if not similarly, at least close enough to each other where all of them are viable. Meanwhile, on B, there's literally just, this is just so strong that there's very rarely any team does anything else, unless it's to like for the people backside, for example, to catch them off guard because they're not expecting it. And it's sort of the same story on A, right? Where you even on A, like there's two different ways people usually do. Either they take all of sight, get a good plant, and then just play, and then just wait for the other team to play retake, or you can literally just stage roll this, plant here, and play post. And it's just, it becomes very stale, very, very, very stale. And especially when we go into mid and see that this choke is very small, this choke is very small, it's very uncomfortable to go towards this, as they also can have pretty nice sightlines here. The lurks aren't incredible, although usually you want to have a lurk just to not give them pretty free mid, pretty freely just be able to go mid. You still need to threaten it a bit, but it's not as valuable as you'd want it to be. And in general, just splitting in general is never really favored at all and is very rarely done because it can be stopped so easily. I do think currently though, like taking some mid space is something that if you manage to do it is still very valuable. It's just that it's so difficult to do currently that I feel like most teams, if not all teams, just don't find it to be a thing that you can do under not a lot of risk. Basically, if you're gonna take a lot of mid space, there's a lot of risk in it, and it's just not worth it a lot of the time. And I want to change that. I want to make it so that it actually feels worth taking mid. And not only that, doing splits and stuff like that. I want that to be something that you actually can do and actually feels viable. I also want there to be able to be a sort of different meta in terms of controllers, as I do feel like the single Viper is a bit boring. I do think B is probably the second you can take all of sight, it becomes a bit easier on B, as there are pretty clear points where you can smoke. Kitchen is always going to be a problem, but I think the kitchen problem can pretty easily just be solved by holding it and taking control of this. Um, and that's where splits come in as well. As now, if you take all of kitchen as well, there's a pretty nice B split you can have. Like if B splits become an actual thing possible to do, now all of a sudden B splits become good because you can take all of kitchen. If you can make a B split work, and it's not like a very highly punishable thing, then all of a sudden you can take all of kitchen, and it's actually a pretty nice way to hold a B. Um, and you because I don't just want to make it so that it's really uncomfortable for attackers, as I do feel like taking all of sight is kind of odd for attackers because you get all these crossfires on the defense and everything. So I don't just want to make it so that attackers are forced to do uncomfortable stuff. I want to actually give them incentive to do those things, and that it actually can be worth it. Um, so yeah, that's what we're gonna look at now. So let's start by looking at A, because A is the thing I've changed the most, and I think it's the most problematic part. So let's go over to my change variant, and it's gonna be extremely changed. There we go. That's it. That's A. So we go from this to this. And immediately, I feel like a lot of people will say, where is the elevation? And I feel like that's a valid criticism. And basically, what I have to say to that is the changes I've sort of made is supposed to be like here with this open space. It's not going to be full straight walls like this. It's going to be like this might be like a half wall. Like you can't go on top of this, but it's going to be like a slanted wall. So this guy might still be able to have an angle on here, and so on and so forth. And on top of that, like playing on top of this is still possible, right? This is still like a sort of pipes. It's going to be about as high as before. I was thinking of just putting like some boxes here, but I just thought it's nice to just be able to have a smoke that covers this. And then sure, duelists can still get on top of this, but I just didn't want there to, I wanted it to be an inherent risk at taking this, and not that they could just like jump, 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 and that they actually needed to like dash over it or something like that, and that it was actually something, and that's why I went with it like this. Then we see like this box as well is also gone, which some might be like, oh, what, why? And as we also can see here, like this is also, the box here is smallened a lot, which basically was made so we don't have this sort of angles here. And also obviously I made it a lot easier to take top here, kind of inspiring it a bit from like a mix between Ascent and sort of Lotus Tower, where basically if attackers wanted to take this, they will literally have a sightline into spawn, but at the same time, it's a lot more difficult to take than it was before. And also just overall, I think having two entrances on a site that's this small, it just inherently doesn't really work, which was what we kind of had before with this. Um, I will say this incentivizes more like site anchoring, as I do feel like I still don't know if I fully love this. I could probably, in hindsight, probably made this maybe a bit smaller just to make backsite a bit bigger because backsite is currently kind of small. But overall, this is kind of the idea I have, at least. This is sort of like just a starting idea where it's just kind of, it just gives defenders more space to play, compared to this, where it's a very tight space, and also it becomes like this smoke here becomes so much more usable, right? Like a smoke that just pops here and you can hold that, and it's actually possible to hold, right? The only real problem still will be like the belt angle, obviously. But even then, like if you just hold from like you can have positions here, right? Where you can like sit in this, you can have a crossfire sort of across like this. Like there's actual options to play on site now, with a stack, and there's actual options to have like cipher setups here, like a trip and like a vice wall. Like there's a lot. It's a lot more simple to just get something going while still not losing the elevation with all of this. We still have this box, and heaven is a lot bigger now. Meaning there's a lot easier to play here. We still have this. Like there's still quite a lot of that elevation and sort of style that I like about Icebox, but it's a lot more. I think it's just in general easier to play site. Well, still they can still push up here, right? They can still like, if a jet wants to, you can have like a guy pushed up here, like just holding belt. You can have a guy holding belt and then somebody like standing on this box looking down this way. Still, you still have like the pipes push sort of deal. It's just a bit more difficult now. Also, obviously the rope is gone, which I always felt that the rope was kind of iffy, where it's like if you can contest it, it's really, it can be, it barely gets used. But if you can't contest it, it's the most abused thing ever because you can literally just go across it and like jump across boxes and do all this, all that. So yeah, this is basically what I've done to A. It's a very big change, and maybe it's a bit too simplistic now from being extreme, like a lot, to just being very simple. But I think I like that about it, as I do feel like I kind of went like 180 on it, where I went from A being this extremely complex with a bunch of angle density to it being almost the opposite. Um, I don't know how defender or attacker sided this would be, but I would imagine this would actually maybe even be a bit defender sided. Um, but yeah, there's quite a lot of changes here. Overall, though, it mostly has to do with just sort of letting defenders breathe a bit, because I do feel like that's kind of what this site needs. Because currently it just feels like attackers just get on site and it's just like, and defenders are literally just dead if they try to anchor onto site. And it still lets them push up and be a bit flexible while still being able to let them breathe playing site setups with like a Killjoy or like a Cypher or something like that. Uh, while still not feeling like it's also becomes a lot more simple to hold a site. Like if somebody wanted to anchor the site, you usually needed to have some really intricate setups. I feel like this just makes it very easy to, it's not it's not that complicated. You just put a smoke here, hold it, maybe blind, like have a little setup with like a trip or something. it makes it a lot easier while not making it super difficult to take sight, as you still can, like if you have like a tails, for example, like this is still very missable, like this corner here, like back sight is still pretty much like it just becomes like sort of it just becomes easier. Like you can breach stun this, for example, or this side if you want to break crossfires. Like there's still a lot attackers can do. It just gives a bit of breathing space for the defenders and a bit of creativity to actually play on site. And that's kind of what I want, while also at the same time creating an opportunity here, for example, where you can actually smoke this choke off now. As I did if we look before or after, push this up a bit. So basically it just kind of, this choke um, becomes a bit smaller and this choke becomes a bit smaller. And then on top of that, I created obviously these boxes so you can get on top of here. But basically just, if you want to play like an Omen or something that's going to look kind of scuffed, because I've obviously drawn on top of this, you could just like smoke here and here, or if you want to take, if you, like you can do a bunch of stuff now with other controllers that actually works. Uh, and I think that's sort of, I like when you can be creative on a map, and I feel like you can kind of be that here, and it still kind of has kept that sort of Icebox identity, at least to me personally. I don't know what other things, and like for example, other people might like. Had a bit of an issue with this because I was like, well, if there's no rope here, what is really the like use case of this? But then I was like, all right, but then like for example, a race might need to satchel in. You might have like, this is like an angled knife for post plant. You'll be able to dash on top of this. It will make it a bit more difficult for attackers to hold, and at the same time also like it still creates a bit of a dilemma, which I kind of like with it. So I still kept this. Also, I think it looks kind of nice with just that there, and doesn't create much open space, and instead creates like areas to play in a different way, and you can kind of play around it, which I kind of like. So yeah, overall, I think maybe it's a bit too simple, but personally, I like it more than current Icebox, and that was kind of my goal, to make it really simple, to kind of contrast what it is right now, where I think it's almost too complex with too high angle density and just too much happening, which just made it so difficult for defenders to do anything. Um, so yeah, let's move over to mid, where we're gonna see a couple changes. This one I'm gonna talk about regarding to B more, but let's just start by Windows Gone. I think that one's pretty obvious. Most people didn't enjoy the window when it came, and I think there's a reason for that. The window is kind of shit. Just personally, kind of shit. I was kind of sick of it. And also, basically, what I ended up doing, I just made it so that like this cannot be smoked off by one smoke, and like even like an Astro Orb or Viper Orb, I'm pretty sure can't cover this entire thing, which basically just makes it more of like a mid. It doesn't just feel like it's an it doesn't just feel like it's another choke to hold. It feels actually like a mid, and it becomes a bit easier for attackers to push it. I also, you can't really see it here. I didn't really know how I'd show it. Maybe I could have pushed this line back a bit, but basically I've also made this bigger under here so you can actually get through this. And then obviously I've pushed everything back. Basically, this, what's supposed to be with this is sort of, I wanted the lurks, if you're gonna lurk to A, for example, I wanted them to be more committed, because currently it just feels like you just get to here and then you got like a line on them, and it's pretty mid lurk, but it's like, okay, whatever. It happens most of the time, and it's not really that special, but it's not really it's not really an interesting lurk. I think this, just being able to have this deep of a line just is so huge. But it also means that you have to commit to walking down this entire lane, which takes quite a long time, especially if you're gonna walk. So it means you need to be very committed, while also making it feel like you have a lot more value as you still get a very deep line. But also, I kind of wanted to make it so that, and sure, attackers can get a deep line here too now, but I do feel like this line is not really that important. as it doesn't cover this whatsoever. So it's more about just making it more comfortable for defenders and attackers to play here. Because I did feel like it was kind of uncomfortable to play mid no matter which side you were playing on before. And I just think this adds a bit more comfortability to that. Also, I feel like in mid now, basically, this actually kind of makes it so that you can push A with a split almost, as you can put a smoke here. And now, obviously, you still need to pass spawn, which is a bit difficult. But you can like put a smoke here, put a neon wall across, and you're basically over. Meanwhile, if we have this old one, I felt like it was kind of a long way there. But now basically you can just smoke this off and then neon wall across, and you're basically there. And you can have a pretty fast A split, which I feel like makes the map more like diverse. Like you can actually do splits on both sides to me. Um, and when we're at this topic, why not segue that into B? As I did focus quite a lot on just making B splits a viable option. Um, I do think A splits is always going to be a bit more difficult due to how connected A is to spawn. But B splits, um, basically what I ended up doing is, if we look here, it looked like this before. I just made it so that the choke point gets up to here instead, and I took away the box. Like, this is still smokable, it's still mollyable, but it just allows attackers to take a bit more space and basically be at sight when if they get stopped. Like, if they get stopped here, at least they're at sight now. Before, it was actually like really far before they actually could get the sight, and this stroke is just tiny, like giga tiny. It's so small. But basically, what this just does, at least in my opinion, just makes it easier for attackers to take this, while still actually making B a bit more uncomfortable to take just a little bit, as we have taken a bit away this little lip that we created. And no, I haven't put a box back here or something. Like, I'm pretty sure they have added before, but basically I've just made it so the site can go a bit further back. We still have this little thing here. But basically my entire goal of this is just so we can kind of like, if we want to as well, just smoke this and this. And then obviously if you B-split now, you can actually smoke kitchen and this. Or you can take kitchen if you want, and then you only need to smoke this. And then it's like, okay, so actually other smokes can become viable. You actually can feel that, right? And basically why I ended up not changing much else about the site more than taking away this lip, making the site a bit bigger, deeper. Not really changing much else is just because although this is not very like, it's not a lot of playable space here for the defenders, because they're now forced to take very deep sight lines. Like, attackers have a lot more options to play like these sort of lines and like spam through this, and like there's a lot more options to like take this and like come in here, and like the kitchen players gets a lot more help, and like you can actually place setups on site with like a killjoy, like having nanos like this for example. Like, it becomes a lot more, it forces attackers to take a lot more space while still giving defenders space to play with. Like, it actually means that while you can fight for this, you're not forced to fight for this to defend, because they can't just put this Viper wall up now, like this sort of Viper wall that we did before. It's still doable, right? You can still get this off and maybe plant like here, but it's a lot easier now for defenders to deny it. Because before it was just a sage wall and then you planted and that's it. But now basically with all this, you kind of get this sort of dilemma where if you do this, um, you are basically forced to like plant here or here, and it's a lot easier to just kind of deny that than it is if we have little lip here where they can just plant behind here, as now these guys can spam and these guys can spam. And sure, if we plant here, but that's the only real place we have now. This is the only place, and if we plant there, this guy is, it's literally the easiest spam of your life. Meaning, basically, unless if you're trying to use that wall, you're basically just fucked on B, at least in my opinion. And then maybe a wall like this becomes more popular, and like along like so, uh, which I think could work better. But I don't know, maybe not. Maybe we still go into something like this and then we go into like some sort of double controller. Basically, it just makes it that it's actually like possible to do other things, which is kind of what I wanted out of this map. But yeah, overall, this is what it looks like. These are the changes made. Um, it kind of, I feel like a lot of it just was taking away quite a lot of the angles while making some things more viable. Um, as you clearly can see here, there's just a lot less going on sites. And there's a lot less boxes and a lot less stuff just happening. Uh, but also, I still feel like there's a lot, like, you can still tell that this is Icebox just by looking at it. Like, it's still clearly Icebox, and I don't think I took away that sort of identity from it. And instead, I felt like I created something that actually could be somewhat playable if you want to be that harsh on Icebox, which I'm not really ready to go that far, but I'm actually like, it's actually almost that bad to me personally. But yeah, tell me what you think in the comments, and like if you enjoyed this video. And I'll see you in the next one.